Welcome back to another edition of Federalist Radio Hour. I am Chris Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist, joined by culture editor Emily Jashinsky and the esteemed Howard Segermark of Capitol Hill. Howard has a long and storied career in conservative politics in Washington, D.C., back from volunteering for Goldwater back in the day. But some of the major things that we want to talk to you about today is your years in the Senate. Particularly, you were tax counsel to Harry Floodgate Floodbart Jr., and then the economic counsel with Senator Jesse Helms, a master of the filibuster and Senate procedure. Now, you, of course, keep busy, as everyone on Capitol Hill ought to do, as a vice president of the American Business Defense Council, a founding board member of the National Civic Arts Society, and also on the board of the Committee for Monetary Research and Education. Howard, thank you for joining us.
I'm glad to be here, Chris. Thanks.
So the filibuster's in the news.
Yes.
The Democrats have been trying to get rid of it for 20 years when they're not using it. But this time it's got the presidential endorsement. It's got CNN's endorsement. It's got everyone's endorsement on the left. They're saying that they want to do this. They ran on this. If they get Joe Manchin, they've got the votes. But people don't really understand what the filibuster is. When they think about it, if they've seen Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, they think that. and then they think about Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Green Eggs and Ham, which they weren't really filibusters.
No.
And people are often surprised to learn, for example, last year, there were 250 filibusters, every one of them by Democrats. And they say, well, this wasn't an all-night news event with CNN. This was not Senator Jesse Helms' storied things. This was just fighting in the Senate. So what is the filibuster?
Well, that's a good question. There are several definitions, and we should explore a little bit of what a filibuster is. Those 250 filibusters that the Democrats held last year were basically this. They objected to a unanimous consent for a time agreement. They did not object to the Senate going on with other business. In other words, let's just say an appropriations bill is coming before the Senate, and they, for some reason or other, want to filibuster it. And there are several reasons to filibuster. One can want an amendment to it. One can want the Senate to focus on another piece of legislation, or they do want to kill it. But not necessarily any of those. There could be other things. A filibuster on a very important piece of legislation might be a means of letting the leadership know that the nomination of the famous Christopher Bedford is not going to be approved by the Senate.
God forbid.
You couldn't. I could never be Senate approved.
But let's take this non-filibuster filibuster that the Democrats and some Republicans, I'm sure, do it as well. You object to a unanimous consent agreement for a time limit. That means that if you get the floor, you have it until you give it up. By the way, you can yield your time to another member of the Senate and not necessarily lose your privileges on the floor. Similarly, you can say, I yield to the Senator so-and-so while reserving the right to resume my comments. That protects you from losing the floor. And that keeps your, quote, filibuster moving until you voluntarily withdraw it, or that they impose cloture. Cloture is one of the rules in the Senate that is used very common when a senator is serious about delaying or trying to kill a piece of legislation. All you need is 60 signatures. You vote. You file a petition. You have 2 days of debate before the petition is voted, and then they can shut off your debate. I don't want to digress too much, but part of the techniques of really running an effective filibuster is you schedule it just before Christmas recess. Or August recess, right, or Easter recess.
They're always in recess now. It's like the third grade, like when you ran for student council in third grade and said, I'll give you recess every day. They do that.
That's right. Well, here's the thing. They want to get home. They schedule fundraisers. They schedule junkets. And no senator wants to have to stay in Washington, when you don't have to, particularly when their campaign says, you will show up at this fundraiser back in Paducah. So they want to get out of town. If, in fact, some senator from New Hampshire says, I object to unanimous consent agreement on this very important bill, they're going to say, okay, what do you want? And that senator is going to respond, I just want to kill the bill. Well, then...
That's not a good... let's negotiate from there.
Exactly. You got it. Absolutely.
I wish, by the way, the GOP is so terrible at this, because the Democrats do that. And the GOP says...
Are you telling me that the Democrats use a tool of the Jim Crow era?
Okay. Well, not going to go down that. Not going to debate on that insane front. But the Republicans were like, well, can you take $5,000 off? Democrats say, no.
No.
And the Democrats will come back and their negotiations like, this isn't happening. And the Republicans say, well, how about we throw 3 gay flags in it and add a tax increase? And they'll say, sure.
Was that dynamic there decades ago where Republicans were much less aggressive in terms of utilizing the mechanisms of Senate procedure as they are in the way that Chris is describing that it happens today? Was that true years ago, or is that more something that it's evolved into?
Well, I only had about, 15 years working for senators. And Helms was by far the most aggressive. Now, what that also means when you hold the filibusters, you're not only upsetting the majority, which is in charge of scheduling the activities in the Senate, you're also upsetting your own party.
Are you saying that Senator Helms wasn't popular with his colleagues?
He was respected.
Can you give us actually some context on what Jesse Helms meant in those sort of 15 years? What was his place in the conservative movement and in politics in general at that time?
Well, I always used to say that Barry Goldwater, who served coterminously with Helms, was just PO'd. Because Helms became Mr. Conservative, and that used to be Barry Goldwater's crown. Helms did it in large part.
Goldwater squished.
Helms figured out how to use direct mail. He set up, a group of Raleigh citizens set up the Congressional Club. They were able to raise more money for Helms's campaign than had ever been raised for any senator campaign since the founding. And because of that, he also got this mailing list. So that, and he signed fundraising letters for other senators. He signed fundraising letters for conservative organizations and helped build the conservative movement as we know it today. Now, that helped him get a lot of loyalties, obviously. And some senators just couldn't get into that game. Goldwater wasn't interested in it, even though Goldwater, certainly at the beginning of Helms' career, was far more popular.
And it's funny, Barry Goldwater not understanding the power of his lists is what built direct mail. Because at the end of his campaign, the founder of direct mail, Richard Viguerie, said, can I have all these names? Someone said, sure. He put them on a computer the size of this house and started mailing people.
With tubes, electric tubes instead of transistors.
So Senator Helms, before Ted Cruz, before Jim DeMint, before all of these different people, before Dr. No, Ron Paul, so there was Senator Helms and doing kind of what the old Bill Buckley National Review thing was, like standing thwart the Senate saying, not unless you give me something.
Well, again, a filibuster is used as many uses. Helms wanted to get the administration and the majority to go along with certain things that they didn't like, but they could give him. Numerous examples. For example, Helms got a bill which would set up a commission to look at the gold standard. Helms was a big gold standard fan. Well, if they wanted him to withdraw his objection to a unanimous consent on a time limit, that was the price. Now, interestingly, I was the go-between at the time, and the administration said, we'll give you a commission.
This is Gerald Ford's administration?
I think it may have been Carter's.
Carter's.
Yeah. We'll give you a commission, but you can only appoint 3 out of the 7 members. I appointed Senator Helms appointed Ron Paul.
That's a good one.
Ron Paul and Lou Lehrman and a third gold bug. So the commission came out with a predictable report against the gold standard. God bless Ron Paul and Lou Lehrman and their friends put together a very good minority report supporting the gold standard. So that was kind of a fun thing. Helms did a similar filibuster before the United States would put out a gold legal tender coin, the American Eagle gold coin, because the Keynesians in the Treasury building didn't want anything to do with gold money. And at some point, I'll explain to you what happened in 1976 on the International Monetary Fund.
And that's when you pushed for being able to deal in gold bullion?
That's when we pushed for being able to have a legally enforceable gold clause contract.
So before we get into that, because I want to hear some of these great stories, they're very entertaining. And it's historical and interesting. There's something about the filibuster that Helms always did, and that other senators, when they would use it, which is you never asked for something that you couldn't get and that they couldn't give you.
They couldn't.
It wasn't simple obstruction.
Absolutely not. It's a waste of time. I mean, God bless Senator Cruz. He did focus attention on whatever he was objecting to, but he didn't accomplish anything. He got some PR.
And I thought that was good on his point. It was all public relations, because years after the Democratic Party had voted for Obamacare, he got them all to come down and put their stamp on it right before the next election and remind every voter that they did it and give everyone ads. So, but it wasn't going to stop it.
No. One of the things, actually, that Helms did in the late 70s was require the Senate to vote on amendments they didn't want to vote. And many people say that it contributed greatly to the totally unexpected Republican takeover of the Senate in the elections of 1980.
Pushing hard votes.
Pushing hard votes that liberals and many moderates did not want to vote on.
That's always the conservative battle cry from the DeMint people, from whoever. When the Republicans say we can't do that, we don't have the votes, say, it's not about that. It's about making the Democrats vote for killing babies on the table. It's about making Democrats say we want to let rapists out of prison. It's like you put that on the record.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like them.
No.
It doesn't sound like them 4 years ago, maybe.
Yeah. Well, back then, of course, it was prayer in school and forced busing.
Yeah, like make them stand by what they say they stand by.
Absolutely.
Or as Senator Ben Sasse, who's actually, effective sometimes, occasionally. He one time tried to pass unanimous consent that the United States Senate is pro-Christians and stands with the Knights of Columbus. And he forced a Democratic senator to have to run down there and object. because if they'd passed that, they would be attacking Mazie Hirono and other members of their caucus accidentally. And that'd be the headline. So some poor senator had to get a call from Schumer saying, get your butt down there and object. Like, to the Knights of Columbus, do it!
Well, can I piggyback on that? Around this time last year, we had a conversation with Lee Edwards where we were asking him, as the turmoil was springing up in the George Floyd protests, and now we're watching the trial proceed, we asked him if this reminded him of 1968, if it was better or worse, and he said it's absolutely worse, because now you have one side convinced that everybody who disagrees with them essentially is a bigot and a bad person, and I wonder how that plays into some of these negotiations legislatively and in the upper chamber, where people actually used to be much more collegial. I have mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, I don't want them to be collegial and be tending the swamp, but on the other hand, it does seem as though there's a fundamental inability for people to come together and even talk anymore, because they seem to be so convinced that any Republican is necessarily a Nazi.
Well, this is true. In fact, one time I was talking about something with Senator Helms, and I said, and I think this is true. I said, you Southerners, I don't know how you can be so kind to some of your colleagues. I won't ride in elevators with certain people in the Senate. But Helms was congenial and on the floor, as and respectful. I mean, one time I had an aide of Alan Cranston, a very, very liberal senator from California, come up to me and say, "Excuse me, Howard, can you think Senator Helms would allow Senator Cranston's amendment?" And here it is on this bill. And so I held my breath, read the amendment, and said, "Yes, I think he would." So, and we got it passed. So,
And you have to remember that the elevator thing. You're not stuck in there with them; they're stuck in there with you, and they're in your cage now.
that's true.
So, tell me some stories about how this worked. I remember the one you mentioned talking with the Ford administration on gold, a colorful interaction, but kind of the way that you would go down there with the filibuster. You'd have something in mind. The senator would have something in mind. He would say, "Execute on it." And this was a good example of how this played out in real time.
Yeah, well, the case was in 1976. The election was heating up. Nobody knew if Ford could defeat Carter. Carter was going to defeat Ford. The Ford administration Secretary of the Treasury was Bill Simon. Great character and highly respected. And he went to Manila to meet with the International Monetary Fund. They meet on alternative years, on even number years in Washington, odd number years somewhere else on the planet. Simon was in Manila, and this is a traditional tool of every administration. You don't want to embarrass the United States before the world. And since Helms had...
That's not there anymore.
Helms had filibustered the International Monetary Fund, increasing their tranche by $175 million. Okay, I met with the Undersecretary of Treasury, Edwin Yao, along with a colleague of mine who identified himself as a Southern lawyer. And I said, "John, you play bad cop. I'm going to play good cop." We had the Undersecretary of the Treasury there, the head of the division on gold, and 3 or 4 lawyers. And so I explained to him, I said, "The senator will allow this bill to move forward if, in fact, the Treasury Department allows his bill, or endorses his bill, to make gold clause contracts legal again." In 1932, Roosevelt outlawed that thing because he didn't want to go back to the gold standard. Okay, this is one small step for mankind if we get this through. So, Yo didn't seem to understand what a filibuster was, and he said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Senator is using every prerogative he can as a member of the Senate." At which point, my friend John Carbaugh said, "What we mean, we're going to filibuster your effing bill to death if you don't agree with us." Well, that gave some color to the pallid cheeks of the undersecretary. They left.
This is Republican on Republican.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, they didn't get back. Helms didn't take the objection off to unanimous consent. And I'm sitting on the floor of the Senate. Meanwhile, there are 2 days left in the session. The IMF bill is going on. Election is in 3 weeks or so. They have to get out of town. A page comes up to me. I'm sitting on the Senate floor. Pages don't come up to staff. He says, "Excuse me, are you Mr. Segermark?" "Yes, I'm Mr. Segermark." "Mr. Segermark, the Secretary of the Treasury is on the phone booth number 2 in the cloakroom. Would you take it?" I said, "Well, yes, of course I take it."
I can find the time.
Yeah. So, Mr. Segermark, this is Bill Simon. I'm here in effing Manila, Philippines.
He was a colorful man.
Every third word was F. And he said, "Jesse Helms tells me you can help me." I said, "I'll do everything I can, sir." He said, "What do you want?" I said, "Senator wants the Treasury Department to endorse an amendment to the IMF bill to restore the gold clause contract." He said, "Well, explain that to me." I did. He said, "I can support that." I said, "Exactly, Mr. Secretary. Helms is not asking for something you can't give him." "Okay, what do we do?" I said, "Well, here's the problem. If the Senate amends the bill right now, it has to go back to the House. So the President gets a bill identical from both houses, but the House is already adjourned for the year. Well, what do we do now? I said, well, okay, if you pledge now that you will support this next January when the new Congress meets, I'm sure we have an agreement. Okay, I'll do it. I said, no, there's another problem. If Mr. Ford loses to Mr. Carter next month,
which was looking pretty likely at that time,
you will not be Secretary of the Treasury in January. In which case, you're not in a position. He said, well, what do we do now? And I said, well, there is a piece.
This is a long-distance call from Manila the whole time.
Oh, yeah.
So what do you want?
If in fact Carter wins, on January 20th, the day he's inaugurated, you will be asked to leave a black notebook in the center of your desk, which contains all of the commitments you've made domestically and internationally. If one of those pages in the notebook embraces the Gold Clause contract, I think we can have the bill on the president's desk in an hour. And I, of course, very carefully said, I'm sure the senator would agree with you, and he will release his, well, of course, I could just walk down to the cloakroom and say, Helms takes his hold off the bill. He said, one more question. If effing Ford loses to effing Carter, you're going to have to write that page for me. A couple weeks later, I get a call. It's Bill Simon. He said, I need you to write that page.
How'd you know about the effing book?
Yeah. He said, they finally explained to me about the book. I said, yes. And I don't know how I will, but it's obviously, it's been used since probably the Adams administration.
I'd be surprised if it's still used today.
Oh, it is.
It is?
Absolutely.
Isn't that wonderful? I thought that the job of the outgoing administration was to booby trap the incoming administration.
Then take your typewriter keys.
Yeah, but for collusion investigations and emails. And isn't that what you're supposed to do when there's a transition in power in the U.S.?
No.
And imprison your opponents?
Yeah, well, the imprison part is key.
That's true.
Yeah, that's the key part.
Remember when lock her up was something that was not allowed? How dare he?
Well, it was misogynistic.
That was like a Democratic platform.
That's right. It was misogynistic.
Yeah.
You can't put women in jail.
But you can put men in jail with women.
Why should people care about the filibuster? Because this is fun. This is interesting. This is Washington stories. But why should conservatives and liberals and people who are, especially those who are outside of just the Washington, D.C. power structure, care about this tool? And is it good for them? Or is it just some relic of Jim Crow, according as Caitlin Collins tells us?
It's one of the reasons the Senate was set up is to preserve minority rights. And the filibuster is a classic situation of that, because every senator has the right to use these tools, even if, in fact, he'd be voted out 99-1. He voted down 99-1. And certainly that's the way Helms addressed it. If he can't get a majority, at least he's going to make his case. Now, since he was skilled in timing and in using this tool, he was successful many times. Mm-hmm. It wasn't earth-shaking successes, but a little bit at a time adds up. And we got things through in Democratic administrations. In fact, it was a lot tougher because we were friendlier with the Reagan administration when it came in. And Carter was, of course, such a nincompoop. His people couldn't figure out how to defeat us.
So you were able to defend. So this is an example of Elizabeth Warren this week comparing the filibuster to a racist tool when she voted yes on over 100 filibusters last year.
Well, that brings me to the question of what is the value of preserving minority rights, if that's what the filibuster is important because of, and we see Elizabeth Warren utilizing it, obviously when she wants to make her own points or to benefit her own cause. What fundamentally is the value of having a Senate that preserves minority rights?
When they came for the guns, I didn't worry about it because I had no guns, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
That's why.
Right. It turns it into the House, right? It kind of just makes it easier to...
Again, the Senate is there, designed by the founders, to give minority rights as much as possible. And in this case, it had to do with like small states, give them rights. And there's nowhere to go if in fact they're simply a democratic elected tyranny.
Mob rule, basically.
Exactly.
It's the House of Representatives. California is way more important than South Dakota is ever going to be.
Yeah.
But does South Dakota deserve a voice? Or does
I just
Rhode
don't think-
Island deserve a voice next to Massachusetts?
I don't think the left fundamentally believes in that anymore. I mean, I think if we made this argument to them, I think they would say exactly.
Well, for years and years and years, we've been pushing this in the Senate, in our elections, and everything that we've done. But they call it democratizing and bringing democracy, which, democracy is a horrible thing. It's a failed government. It doesn't work. That's why we have a republic. Well, that's how we started, and they're trying to make it into a democracy by not teaching civics, not teaching what republics are, not teaching what we have, and trying to make it more and more democracy. And the problem with democracy is mob rule, because it's whoever's in charge.
50% plus one is a tyranny.
Yeah, right now we see it very interestingly in the Senate, where there's 51 Democrats. They actually have to fight, and they might not have the votes to do really anything. It's kind of like, usually that happens to the Republicans, it seems, much more than Democrats. This is interesting. There's always a Romney or a Collins or a Murkowski. It's a pretty reliable liberal vote because they like the press. The Democrats rarely do this, but they are doing it. But in the House of Representatives, Republicans don't really... What are they going to do to Nancy Pelosi? She's in charge. It's mob rule. It's whoever's got the most people. And the Senate's different.
Well, also the power of the majority versus the minority. There are certain things that, the Republican leaders in the House and Senate can do to penalize their non-loyal members. In many respects, the House more than the Senate, because the senators will still have those rules that protect them, such as being able to object to unanimous consent agreement. The House, they can pull somebody's committee assignments.
Yeah, they can throw you into Azkaban or the backbench.
Azkaban.
Yeah, even
Death Eaters.
Well, that's been a thing with Republican and some of the liberal senators, more with conservative senators, is they haven't always been the best at making friends. True. But they're still a U.S. senator, so you can't just ship them off to where they can't hurt Mitch McConnell anymore. You don't have to play basketball with Rand Paul in the afternoon. He can still screw up your bill if he wants to, because of these rights.
That's right. No, you're absolutely. And also, that also affects the administration. Orrin Hatch used to brag that some Democratic administration sent up much better judicial appointees because Orrin Hatch stood ready to filibuster bad ones. Now, some of us didn't believe him, but that does make sense. And the filibuster can be used as a means of defeating an appointment. Helms certainly, who was the governor of Massachusetts?
Weld.
Mr. Weld was going to be appointed to be ambassador to Mexico. It never happened because of Senator Helms.
Oh, that's too bad. So tell me that story. How did that play out? Because this would not just be on bills. Helms was famous for holding up nominees. I remember meeting a man at a cocktail party. He was a belligerent, ugly person. And food was falling out of his mouth, and he was yelling at me about how Jesse Helms had ruined his father's life. He was a career civil servant. He got nominated for something. He went through hell for 2 years, and he never got the job. And I think you came up at that point, and I said, well, he worked for Helms. He turns to you, and you said...
Hey, thanks, Chris.
and he said, your dad ruined my life. And you said, yeah, well, we probably needed something. It was just very cavalier about it. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah.
So tell us about how this worked.
Well, in Weld's case, Helms really wanted to defeat the nomination. It wasn't like
he just didn't like Bill Weld.
No, not at all. he was, and so Helms put a notification that he would object to any unanimous consent agreement on a time limit for the consideration of the nomination of Governor Weld. And of course, immediately the administration comes to Helms and comes to his chief of staff. Fortunately, I wasn't handling appointees at that point. Called the staff. Staff explained to him what Helms's position was, and probably it was one of those cases where the timing was everything. And for example, I mentioned that it takes 2 days before a cloture vote can be held after a cloture petition is filed. Well, and I didn't mention that the Senate also, under its rules, has to dispose of any amendment that has been filed to a bill before the vote is taken, after the petition is filed, but before the vote. Well, we were ready at certain petitions if, in fact, they impose cloture. Oh, by the way, and under Senate rules, you have to have a 15-minute vote. Now, if I have write up an amendment for the senator that on line 6, $4 million is scratched out, and in lieu thereof, $3,999,999, period, insert in lieu thereof. Doesn't take a lot of creative genius to pull out 10,000 amendments. And we'd never pulled that off, but we did.
Because it'd be annoying.
Oh, it'd be so
And then the parliamentarian might be mad at you.
Yes. But again, if in fact they wanted to get back home to go to those fundraisers and the junkets and see their ex-wife and things like that, and we were going to stop that. One time Helms was filibustering a bill that would raise gas taxes. And I remember working with a truckers organization, and they had semi-trailer trucks doing nothing but slowly driving around the United States Capitol, Independence Avenue, Constitution Avenue.
I love the trucker strikes. There used to be a bunch in favor of President Trump and a few against President Barack Obama.
Yeah, it was great. So, and I remember Alan Simpson, Republican of Wyoming, and he was just outraged that Helms was keeping the Senate in session.
The Republicans just wanted to vote on taxes increases and go home.
And go home.
Nothing has changed.
And Helms, when senators speak against another senator, the rules dictate that they have to notify that senator that they're going to speak against.
Oh.
And Helms gets the notification from Simpson. And I was on the Senate floor in the staff couches at the time. And Simpson starts. And Simpson was junior from Helms, and his desk was right behind Helms's. And Simpson goes up, and he works himself into a lather. Helms is being obdurate and obnoxious and going on and on and on. And Helms is just sitting there, and this poor staffer was saying this. He said, "Oh, Republicans are talking against each other. This is terrible." And I'm grinning. This is theater.
And this is my next direct mail piece.
No, but Simpson didn't understand what Helms was doing at all. And and Helms said, Simpson finally sits down.
Out of breath.
Some other senator says, "I suggest the absence of a quorum, Mr. Abolish, Mr. and go through the Senate. It's a way of killing time."
Right.
So Simpson, blood pressure comes down, and Helms turns around and goes and extends his hand to Simpson and says, where the staff could hear, "Alan, I love you." And Simpson just didn't know what the hell to do. There's this old Baptist Christian sincerely saying, I know what you said, but this is showbiz, kids.
Killing him with kindness.
Kill him with kindness. It was a great scene. I'll never forget that.
Oh my goodness.
When he was filibustering on a nomination, that would be the difference thing from a bill, when he would just say, my answer is no. Or maybe I don't like what the Department of State did with China, so I'm going to ruin the lives of 2 of your civil servants, and you pick them.
It could also be things like staffing. I don't mind him going down to Mexico But I want...
But not as an ambassador.
Personal reasons.
You have the title. But there are ways that, ambassadors can be put on leashes. And, Helms has had enough knowledge of the infrastructure of the foreign policy establishment that he could say, no, he must take as his first deputy blankety blank and his second deputy blankety blank. And I don't know if the guys in the foreign policy shop in Helms ever actually did that, but I wouldn't put it past them.
And you've talked about this before, because back then the Senate staff was a place where it was much more common for people to spend years of their lives, and it wasn't staffed by... There's always a lot of older people who know what's going on, but not enough. And then a lot of junior people just kind of going through and trying to use their Senate badges as IDs at bars.
A rotating cast of 20-somethings fresh out of school. Yeah.
Everything.
Right.
And this was before Google and the internet. So you had to have the answers between your team. So tell me about what it was like back then to be in that room with those teams and these groups that they pulled together.
Well, one thing, Senator Helms served while Ted Kennedy was there. And one thing I have to compliment Senator Kennedy, I know it's hard for you to believe I could compliment him.
He's a great driver.
He's a great driver.
Wow.
He had great staff. He had excellent staff. And I think he also had an unusual situation where he had muscles that he could turn his ear 90 degrees down, because the Senate staff would allow these low chairs right next to the senator's chairs. And you could see this staffer going, and in fact, in 1972, 492,672, and then Ted Kennedy would just mouth those words right after that staff said it. Nowadays, of course, they could just implant a chip in somebody's ear.
Like they do for Biden.
Like they do for Biden. Yeah. But
hello, Maureen.
But generally speaking,
Maureen.
you're right. You have to be able to help the senator. One time, I was in that little chair next to Senator Helms's desk, and there was a debate, and Senator Harry Blood Byrd joined it in saying that we have to be careful of this bill because it'll increase the deficit and it's going to cause inflation. Now, that takes a bit of a stretch of belief. But at the same time, Don Regal, who was chairman of the Senate Banking Committee, was walking through the Senate, and he heard this. And he knows that deficits and inflation are not necessarily automatic. And he starts, would the senator from Virginia yield? Well, I'm glad to yield. Byrd said, I'm glad to yield to my colleague from Michigan. And he started going on, does the senator not know that the United States has tons and tons of gold in Fort Knox, and it's backing the dollar? And Helms said, did he just say what I thought he said?
We weren't on the gold standard.
We were not on the gold standard.
Oh no!
No, I was able to say, Senator, August 15th, 1971, Richard Nixon took the United States off of the gold standard, and there is no relationship between the value of the dollar and our gold reserves. And just nailed the chairman of the banking committee, who should have known better.
The chairman of the banking
Chairman of the banking committee.
Okay, I'm feeling worse about the staffing. No offense, staffers. It's meant. And about the same about the senators. So there still were senators who just didn't seem to know what was going on.
Again, it's sometimes their job definition is different than others. One is their job definition is to get reelected, to raise as much money for a campaign, and to fool around with other men's wives.
It's an easy job.
Yeah, I mean,
you don't have to deal with legislation that much.
That's for the staff.
Unless legislation happens to be one of the wives' names.
Wow.
When I was a senator, and I have to say, withhold his name, but he said, I believe in as opposed to lobbyists, concerning lobbyists, I believe in drinking their booze, eating their food, screwing their women, and voting against them.
I think that's a good philosophy.
That's-
That's how you survive in the swamp.
We need to get that knitted on a throw pillow. Put it right here.
Howard does have a throw pillow that says, "If I cannot smoke cigars in heaven, then I shall not go. Or
Oh,
I
I've
cannot
seen
smoke
that,
in heaven, then I shall not go."
So cigars.
Well, when you look at what's happening in the Senate today, I think what Chris was trying to get at is how much better or worse is it? And my question would be, as you sort of watch from your vantage point now, what do you think? In what ways does it compare to your experience? And, are we in trouble given the way that things are running on the Hill right now?
Yes, things are going to hell in a handbasket. But they've been going to hell in a handbasket for 200 years.
Slowly. And now quickly.
No, I had a lot of fun. Working for Helms was a man who not only delegated authority, but he delegated responsibility. In other words, I could suggest to him that it's a good time to filibuster a bill.
Mm-hmm.
And after about 18 months of working for him, we thought alike.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was great fun to work for somebody like that. And as a result, it's kind of fun to say, the senator will object to this bill, or the senator, and from time to time I'd get a call from the senator and say, Howard, he was from North Carolina, Howard, would you like to explain to me why I'm filibustering this bill?
I'm having the most awkward conversation with somebody right now.
But again, he felt comfortable sending the Secretary of the Treasury. He talked to his gopher sitting on the Senate floor,
Right.
Which is very complimentary, obviously. So it was great fun working for him. I don't know if any senator has done that. One interesting anecdote about Senator Harry Flood.
I do meet staff, though, who think that they're senators all the time.
Oh, I have two.
It's not unusual.
I remember rewriting that law. Oh, you did you?
Who elected you?
Exactly. This is a story that can be told because the great Senator Harry Flood Byrd Jr. is gone. But when Richard Nixon was about to be impeached, Harry Byrd took his 4 legislative assistants into his office and he said, it may well be that the President of the United States will be impeached by the House. When the Senate tries the President, if he is impeached, I believe that my most important vote in my career will be the vote on that decision. I want, therefore, 2 of you to do nothing except work on that issue from here until it is resolved. 1, to prepare a brief for me that would acquit the president, and 1 to prepare a brief that would convict the president. The other 2 will assume all of the responsibilities of the 2 working on that thing. And I have a feeling, and he said, and I wanted this meeting to discuss who should take those roles. I had a feeling he knew exactly who was going to do it. And I was not one of them, thank God. But I'll bet dollars to donuts that when Bill Clinton was tried before the Senate, nobody put that much effort into it. And yet it's a crucial issue, and Byrd was sincere, that he thought that when you impeach a president, that's serious stuff. And they didn't pay attention to it. And certainly they didn't when Clinton was impeached. So it's an interesting.
Or when Donald Trump was impeached for a perfect
Twice.
phone call.
A perfect phone.
A perfect phone call. And then they tried to impeach him again.
That's right.
For a perfect speech.
Yeah.
The answer to your question is that
No.
things aren't as fun, as good as they were.
Right.
Because there were senators that were very conscientious.
And there now are cell phone cameras, which have ruined all the hijinks.
Much of them.
You can't sleep in elevators. You can't. I mean, you just
pass
can't.
out in elevators.
Yeah, you can't ride through Washington D.C. on horseback while drinking at night
without any clothes on.
Washington's changed, and some of it's for the better, but
what I'm hearing
some
is
of it's for the
that
worse.
women ruined the Senate. That's really my takeaway from the whole conversation.
And the Metropolitan Club, and I mean, go on and on and on. But not podcasts. Well, thank you, Howard. Thank you for joining us. Before we get canceled forever, thank you for joining us. This has been wonderful. I look forward to bringing you on again to hear some more of these stories soon. And thanks, Emily Jashinsky.
Yes.
So I am Chris Bedford, senior editor at the Federalist, here with Emily Jashinsky, a culture editor, and Howard Segermark, a longtime D.C. Anti-hero.
Thank you.
Until next time, always be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.